History is stranger than fiction. From bizarre laws to horrifying experiments, the past is filled with events so shocking, you'd think they were made up. Today, we're uncovering 10 of the most unbelievable historical events, each stranger than the last and almost impossible to believe actually happened. Before we begin, I invite you to drop in the comments where you're watching from, which story was your favorite, and subscribe to the channel if you want to follow us on our journey to uncovering history's most bizarre events. Number 1. The Great Stink of 1858, London, UK. In the summer of 1858, London was brought to its knees by a disaster that became known as the Great Stink. Temperatures soared in one of the hottest summers on record, and with the heat came a suffocating odor that blanketed the city. The source was the River Thames, swollen not with fresh water, but with decades of accumulated human sewage, animal waste, and toxic industrial runoff. For centuries, the river had been London's lifeline, providing drinking water, transportation, and commerce. But by the mid-19th century, the booming population, swelling past 2 million, had turned it into an open sewer. Cesspools overflowed into the streets, drains carried waste directly into the Thames, and slaughterhouses poured blood and entrails into its current. In normal weather, the foul mix was bad enough. Under the oppressive heat of 1858, it fermented into something utterly unbearable. Contemporary accounts describe the air as so rank that curtains were soaked in chloride of lime in a desperate attempt to keep out the smell. Businesses closed. Citizens fled their riverside homes. Even inside the Grand Palace of Westminster, members of Parliament found themselves gagging and pressing handkerchiefs to their faces. The stench grew so overwhelming that Parliament itself was forced to suspend business, bringing the machinery of empire to a halt. Yet this crisis became the turning point London desperately needed. Lawmakers finally recognized that the health of the city could no longer be ignored. They commissioned Sir Joseph Bazalgette, a brilliant civil engineer, to design an ambitious new sewer system. His plan, 135 miles of main sewers and nearly 1,000 miles of street sewers, redirected waste away from the Thames and out toward the sea. The results were transformative. The Great Stink ended, but more importantly, the new system drastically reduced outbreaks of cholera, typhoid, and other waterborne diseases that had once ravaged the population. Bazalgette's engineering marvel not only saved thousands of lives, but laid the foundation for modern urban sanitation across the world. The Great Stink of 1858 remains a reminder that sometimes it takes a crisis so foul, so overwhelming, that a society has no choice but to change. From choking fumes to an unexpected animal uprising, Napoleon's rabbits turned a celebration into chaos. Number 2. Napoleon attacked by rabbits, 1807, Fontainebleau, France. In the summer of 1807, after the treaties of Tilsit brought a temporary peace between France, Prussia, and Russia, Emperor Napoleon Bonaparte decided to celebrate in suitably aristocratic fashion, with a grand rabbit hunt. Such hunts were a traditional pastime among Europe's elite, meant to showcase wealth, status, and leisure in contrast to the violence of the battlefield. Napoleon's chief of staff, Alexander Berthier, arranged the spectacle, acquiring several thousand rabbits for the event. But rather than sourcing wild hares from the countryside, Berthier's suppliers took an easier route, gathering tame, domesticated rabbits raised in pens for food. When these animals were released onto the field, something utterly unexpected occurred. Instead of scattering in fear before the hunters, the rabbits turned as one and began to charge straight at Napoleon and his officers. To the animals, men on horseback resembled familiar figures, their human caretakers, who usually arrived with buckets of feed. What was meant to be a noble hunt quickly descended into comedy and chaos. The fluffy horde swarmed the emperor's party, leaping into coats, clambering over boots, and nipping at trousers. Napoleon, startled but maintaining his dignity as best he could, tried to fend them off with a riding crop. Yet the tide of squealing, hungry rabbits only grew thicker, advancing in waves and encircling the imperial entourage. At last, the world's most disciplined strategist, the man who had outmaneuvered coalitions and crowned himself Emperor of the French, was forced into a hasty retreat to his carriage, pursued by an army of rabbits. Eyewitnesses later recalled the surreal scene with laughter, and the tale spread quickly across Europe. What began as a carefully staged celebration ended as farce, and the incident became legendary, a reminder that even Napoleon Bonaparte, master of battlefields, could be humbled not by kings or generals, but by nature's smallest and most absurd soldiers. From the absurd to the macabre, the posthumous trial of a former leader. Number 3. Posthumous execution of Oliver Cromwell, 1661, Tyburn/Westminster, England. When Oliver Cromwell died in 1658, he was buried with honor in Westminster Abbey, the resting place of England's kings and statesmen. As Lord Protector, he had ruled the Commonwealth with iron resolve after the execution of King Charles I, and for a time, his power seemed unshakable. Yet his radical vision for England, abolishing the monarchy and ruling as a republican dictator, had bitterly divided the nation. Just 2 years later, everything changed. In 1660, the monarchy was restored under Charles II, and Cromwell's enemies seized their chance for revenge. Determined to erase his memory and humiliate his cause, Parliament ordered Cromwell's body exhumed from its place of honor. On January 30, 1661, the 12th anniversary of Charles I's execution, Cromwell's corpse, alongside those of fellow regicides Henry Ireton and John Bradshaw, was put on trial. The macabre proceedings ended with the bodies being symbolically hanged at Tyburn, their lifeless remains swinging from the gallows. Afterward, Cromwell was posthumously beheaded, his skull separated from his decaying body in a grotesque parody of justice. His severed head was then mounted on a spike above Westminster Hall, where it remained for over 20 years, exposed to the wind, rain, and the gaze of countless onlookers. It stood as a grim warning. No matter how powerful or defiant, opposition to the crown would be punished, even beyond death. Cromwell's head became a morbid relic, passing through private collectors and resurfacing centuries later in bizarre circumstances. But the act of exhuming, executing, and desecrating his corpse remains one of history's most chilling examples of political vengeance, a reminder that in times of upheaval, the fight for power does not always end with the grave. From corpses to miraculous survivals against atomic devastation. Number 4. A man survived both atomic bombs, 1945, Hiroshima, Nagasaki, Japan. On August 6, 1945, Tsutomu Yamaguchi, a 29-year-old naval engineer, was in Hiroshima on a business trip when the first atomic bomb was dropped. He was less than 2 miles from the blast's epicenter. The explosion seared his skin, ruptured his eardrums, and temporarily blinded him, leaving him with severe burns across much of his body. Dazed and wounded, he somehow managed to crawl from the ruins of the city and spend a night in a bomb shelter amid the unimaginable devastation. The following day, still covered in bandages, he made his way to the train station, astonishingly still operational, and returned to his home city of Nagasaki. Despite his condition, he reported to work on August 9, determined to fulfill his duties. That morning, he found himself describing the blinding flash and devastation of Hiroshima to his skeptical coworkers. As he was speaking, the second atomic bomb exploded over Nagasaki. The office building collapsed around him, but miraculously he survived again, this time with only minor injuries compared to the first blast. Yamaguchi had endured the unthinkable 2 nuclear attacks in just 3 days. He suffered from radiation sickness, hair loss, and other long-term health complications, but against all odds, he lived into old age, passing away in 2010 at the age of 93. The Japanese government later recognized him as the only official survivor of both atomic bombings, granting him the unique status of Nijuhibakusha, twice-bombed person. His life became a living testament to the resilience of the human spirit, but also a haunting reminder of nuclear warfare's unparalleled destruction. Yamaguchi spent much of his later life speaking about his experiences, urging the world to pursue peace and the abolition of nuclear weapons. From miraculous survival to surgical terror in the operating room. Number 5, a surgeon with a 300% mortality rate, 1847, London, UK. In the early 19th century, before the discovery of anesthesia, surgery was a brutal and terrifying ordeal. Patients were held down by assistants while enduring unimaginable pain, and surgeons raced against time to complete operations as quickly as possible. Among these men stood Robert Liston, a Scottish surgeon famed throughout Europe for his incredible speed and boldness in the operating theater. Liston was nicknamed the fastest knife in the West End, and his record-breaking amputations often lasted mere seconds. Speed was essential. Every moment spared meant less agony for the patient, but haste carried its own risks. One infamous case became legendary in medical history. During a leg amputation, Liston worked with his usual ferocity. His blade flashed so quickly that he not only removed the patient's leg, but also accidentally slashed the fingers of his assistant who was holding the limb steady. In the chaos, he swung so wildly that he also cut through the coat of a nearby spectator, who collapsed in fright. The results were catastrophic. The patient soon died from infection, the assistant succumbed to blood poisoning from his wound, and the spectator, believing himself fatally injured, died of shock. The operation, intended to save a life, had instead claimed 3 deaths in a single surgery. This grisly accident earned Liston the notorious distinction of having the only known 300% mortality rate in medical history. Though shocking, the tale highlights the grim reality of medicine before antiseptics and anesthesia. Surgeons like Liston pushed the limits of their craft in an era when speed and brute skill were the only defenses against pain and death. Within just a few decades, however, the introduction of ether and antiseptic techniques transformed surgery from a desperate gamble into a discipline of precision and science. From surgical chaos to unusual beauty rituals in ancient Rome. Number 6, gladiator sweat as beauty product, ancient Rome. In the spectacle-driven world of ancient Rome, gladiators were more than fighters. They were living icons of strength, endurance, and raw masculinity. Their fame rivaled that of modern athletes or celebrities, and their sweat and blood carried a strange, almost mystical allure. Wealthy Roman women, desperate to capture some of this perceived vitality, would pay handsomely for the sweat and dirt scraped from gladiators' bodies after matches. This strange ritual wasn't mere curiosity. Roman physicians and beauty enthusiasts believed that gladiator sweat had medicinal and cosmetic properties. Women mixed it into creams and cosmetics, applying it to their faces in hopes of improving their skin's glow, enhancing fertility, or channeling the virility of the fighters. Some even believed it acted as an aphrodisiac, a direct infusion of gladiatorial power into their own bodies. The practice extended beyond sweat. Gladiators' blood collected after combat was sometimes consumed in small doses, thought to cure epilepsy or imbue strength. While horrifying to modern sensibilities, these customs reflected the Romans' deep-seated blend of superstition, medicine, and obsession with physical perfection. It also underscores the celebrity status gladiators held. Despite often being slaves or prisoners, their image and bodily essence were marketed and sold to the elite. To touch, or even consume, the residue of a gladiator was to symbolically share in their fame, vigor, and resilience. This bizarre practice shines a light on the extremes of Roman luxury and the lengths to which people would go in pursuit of beauty, health, and vitality. It remains one of the more unsettling examples of how superstition and spectacle intertwined in the ancient world. From cosmetic oddities to a war that lasted centuries without a single casualty. Number 7. The longest war with no casualties. 1651 to 1986. Isles of Scilly versus Netherlands. For centuries, the Isles of Scilly off the coast of Cornwall were technically locked in a war with the Netherlands, though it was perhaps the most bloodless conflict in history. The so-called war lasted more than 300 years without a single battle being fought, nor a single casualty recorded. The origins lay in the mid-17th century during the English Civil War, when the Royalist Navy, loyal to King Charles I, used Scilly as a stronghold against the parliamentarians. Frustrated with Royalist raids on Dutch shipping, the Netherlands declared war on the tiny islands in 1651. But by the time the declaration was issued, the parliamentarians had already forced the Royalists out, leaving the Dutch with no enemy to fight. The war slipped into obscurity, never officially pursued, and simply became a bureaucratic relic of shifting alliances and forgotten paperwork. For centuries, the conflict existed only in dusty records, unnoticed by both sides. It wasn't until a local historian stumbled upon the forgotten declaration that the matter came to light. In 1986, Dutch officials and representatives from Scilly met in a small, good-natured ceremony to formally sign a peace treaty, ending what had become the world's longest, bloodless war. Though absurd, the story reveals how history can sometimes preserve conflicts in name only, lingering long after the reasons for them have vanished. It remains a curious reminder that not all wars are fought with guns and soldiers. Some are fought on paper, and then forgotten entirely. Number 8. The Grooms of the King's Stool. 1509 to 1547, England. Among the many peculiarities of King Henry VIII's court, few roles were stranger, or more prestigious, than that of the Groom of the Stool. This position, entrusted to only the king's closest and most loyal servants, involved a task few would envy, assisting the monarch with his bowel movements. The groom was responsible not only for cleaning the king and maintaining his chamber pot, but also for monitoring his health through this most private of functions. Despite the intimate and humiliating nature of the work, the position carried immense privilege. In an age when access to the monarch determined power, the Groom of the Stool was constantly at Henry's side, privy to his secrets, moods, and unguarded thoughts. The king often spoke most freely during these private moments, and the groom became not just a servant but a confidant and advisor. The role also granted unmatched political influence. Courtiers and nobles alike sought favor through the grooms, knowing they had the king's ear in ways others did not. Far from being shamed by the work, these men wielded their access to rise in rank and fortune. In fact, all 4 grooms who served Henry VIII were eventually knighted, their careers flourishing from this bizarre intersection of bodily duty and royal power. What seems grotesque to modern sensibilities was, in Tudor England, a symbol of ultimate trust and proximity to the throne, a reminder that in the politics of kingship, influence could be won in the most unexpected of places. From intimate service to corporate absurdity, the Navy owned by a soda company. Number 9. Pepsi briefly owned the world's 6th largest navy. 1989 Cold War. In the late years of the Cold War, Pepsi found itself at the center of one of history's most bizarre corporate deals. The Soviet Union, eager to expand Western products inside its borders, struck a barter agreement with the American soft drink giant. The problem was the Soviet ruble. It wasn't convertible on the global market, meaning Pepsi couldn't be paid in usable currency. To get around this, both sides had to negotiate in trade goods. The arrangement began with Pepsi receiving shipments of Stolichnaya vodka, which it sold abroad for profit. But by the late 1980s, as the deal expanded, the Soviets offered something far stranger: a fleet of aging military vessels, including 17 submarines, a cruiser, a frigate, and a destroyer. In exchange, Pepsi granted the USSR exclusive rights to distribute the soda across the Soviet bloc. For a brief, surreal moment in 1989, Pepsi technically commanded the 6th largest navy in the world, a corporate empire with submarines docked under its name. Of course, Pepsi quickly sold the vessels to a Swedish scrapyard, but the episode became a lasting Cold War oddity. Beyond the absurd image of a soft drink company owning a navy, the deal underscored the strange realities of Cold War economics, where commerce, politics, and military power collided in unexpected ways. As Pepsi's CEO later joked to U.S. national security officials, "We're disarming the Soviet Union faster than you are." Number 10, the shortest war in history, 1896, Stone Town, Zanzibar. On the morning of August 27, 1896, the island of Zanzibar became the stage for the shortest recorded war in history. The crisis began when Sultan Hamid bin Thuwaini, who had maintained close ties with Britain, suddenly died. His chosen successor, Khalid bin Bargash, seized the throne without British approval. Determined to maintain their influence over this vital East African trading hub, the British demanded Khalid step down. He refused, barricading himself in the palace and raising a force of nearly 3,000 loyal defenders. The standoff was brief. By 9 a.m., British warships had assembled in the harbor, their guns trained directly on the royal palace. When the ultimatum expired, the fleet unleashed a devastating bombardment. Within minutes, the palace was engulfed in flames, the Sultan's artillery silenced, and his small naval force sunk or disabled. By 9:38 a.m., just 38 minutes after hostilities began, the war was over. Khalid fled into exile, while the British swiftly installed a new, more compliant sultan. Casualties were starkly one-sided, around 500 Zanzibaris killed or wounded, compared to just one British sailor injured. The lightning-fast conflict showcased not only Britain's overwhelming naval superiority, but also the fragility of local rule in the face of colonial power. Though brief, the Anglo-Zanzibar War symbolized an era when imperial interests could topple governments in less than an hour, an entire kingdom reduced to flames before breakfast. It holds the record for the shortest war in recorded history, a surreal footnote in global military history. From rabbits overrunning an emperor to miraculous survivals, deadly surgeons to soda navies, these 10 shocking oddities reveal that the past is stranger, darker, and more unpredictable than fiction. History is full of secrets waiting to be uncovered.